Awesome. Hello and welcome to Dublin Tech Summit. Good to be here. Fantastic to see you all today. I'm Spencer Skates, CEO and co-founder of Amplitude. For those of you who don't know Amplitude, what we do is we're the #1 product analytics solution in the market. So we help you understand what your users are doing, where they're getting stuck, where they're getting value out of your product, and really getting a deep view into what's going on with your user base. Today I have Deep Bagchi joining me from ITV. He's the Chief Product Officer there. Deep, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. So I'm at ITV, the television company in the UK broadcaster. Before that, I worked for The Economist Group, and before that for CNBC, NBC Universal, all in the product and tech space. A big fan of the Amplitude product, know it from my days at NBC, so looking forward to this chat.
Fantastic. So let's go ahead and dig in. One of the first areas I wanted to ask about was product in media. And one of the really interesting things that we found at Amplitude is that what people think of as the product has changed over time. You know, historically, you think of a product as like the physical thing you buy in a store, or the thing that you consume. But now the product has become much broader than that. Can you talk a little bit about how digital has made what the product is evolved in the media space?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time, the product in the media space was the content. And it is still largely the content. Whether you're in news media or entertainment, whether you're working in print publications or television or streaming, it was all about the content. And for a long time, media companies didn't think they needed a product role per se, because the content creators, the curators, were the people who had the product sense, who knew what to curate, what to create. And I think the big change came with the change in distribution and the move to digital. And suddenly you can aggregate audiences online, and you had a direct-to-customer relationship that you needed to manage. And so it went from a world of where you knew what you wanted to curate and create, and it was the art of that, to a world where you actually had to understand what the customer wanted and serve those needs. And I think that's the shift that happened for a lot of the companies, where they realized they now needed a product function who understood what the customer wanted, but then could map that to the content they had, as well as the business model that they had. And so product in the media world really sits at the intersection of the customer, the technology side and how you deliver those experiences, the business side, which in the old days would be the publisher or the ad sales team or whatever, as well as the distribution side, so distribution, marketing, all the other business sides, and the content creators. So you really sit in the middle of all of that, and you are as a function, you understand and can map all of that together.
How long has the Chief Product Officer role really existed at ITV?
So this is the first Chief Product Officer role.
On the role.
And at The Economist as well, I was the first CPO. So there's definitely a growing recognition amongst companies that A, you need a product team, a product as a function to work, and then B, increasingly, the first stage of getting product into these companies was product managers embedded in different areas of the company. So you might have product managers working with the newsroom or with the content creators. You might have product managers embedded with the commercial or publisher teams. So you have product managers embedded, but what increasingly became clear is that actually you needed to stitch this whole thing together, and you needed product to be a function, you needed to have career growth for product managers, you needed to upskill your product managers, and so that's when a lot of media companies realized they needed to have a CPO and a product function, the same way they would have a CMO for marketing or a CDO for data. And so I think that's been a big recognition within media companies.
What was the state of the organization like before you joined at ITV? What were they trying to solve that they weren't able to without you?
Yeah, I think it's not about me as an individual person. I think it's just the recognition that product needs to have a seat at the top table, and that product, like any of the other functions, needs to be considered right up front when you're building a new streaming service or you're trying to launch a new app. Product needs to be really at the front and center of all of that. And it's not just at ITV, it was similarly at The Economist, as I just described. You had product managers embedded with the newsroom or product managers embedded with the publisher, but you needed to join all of that up. So it's really about finding that mix between what makes you special, which is your content curation and your content creation, because that's what your journalists know, or that's what your content creators know, as well as understanding the business side and mapping the Venn diagram of those two things often requires a CPO who has one kind of functional reporting line to all the product managers in the organization.
Yeah, one of the big themes that we focus on at Amplitude is the rise of the Chief Product Officer. And so, I remember when you first started the company, people were like, "Are you crazy? You're going to build a company around selling to product teams? They smallest functional org in the company, no budget, no direct authority, have to lead by influence. Like, does this really make sense?" But one of the things that we were convinced is a lot of the changes that you had been talking about at all these companies, where you do need someone to think about the end-to-end customer experience and bring the different parts of the business together. So that would be kind of the future most influential part of the organization.
Yeah.
It was a lot like how chief marketing officers maybe a decade ago all of a sudden became incredibly important at a bunch of different companies. We saw that that's starting to happen in the product world, particularly at tech companies, but now, especially with media and ITV and tons of non-tech are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because all these roles that I've done, the tech budget and the marketing budget are much bigger than a product budget. And product by itself, and from a vendor perspective, or the size of teams is much smaller. But it's all about the influence. It's really getting the business to think customer first, to join all these dots, and as you said, to create an end-to-end customer experience. And so over time, what that often means is you are one of the key stakeholders in deciding or discussing a vendor or an approach within marketing or an approach within technology, and you're often driving that through the entire organization.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me about, have there been any businesses within the media landscape that have been reluctant to embrace this new approach?
Any particular companies or sectors?
Just where have you seen it do really well, and where have you seen it maybe companies take a little longer to tackle this way of building products?
I think there are some places where the content creators are still extremely extremely in the driver's seat and are really driving a lot of the thinking. So there are companies where maybe the newsroom, for example, is extremely driven between a print publication side and a digital side. So that might be one place where product managers operate in the digital side, but if still a large proportion of your employees and your business comes from print or linear television, you don't feel an immediate need to bring in a whole bunch of product managers and go through this digital transformation. So I think it comes back to a digital transformation and a business model transformation. Once most of your customers and your distribution is tipped over to digital, this becomes really imperative. But as long as you still have the old ways of doing business, so whether you have a big linear side, television side that doesn't require product managers, or big print distribution side, you're distributing print magazines, you don't feel the need to go all in on product. But that tipping point often comes, and it's often not when the digital side has even hit 50-50 of revenue. It's just that the digital side has a much higher level of profitability, and it's growing much faster than the legacy business side, and that's already enough for companies to recognize that they need to do something, they need to invest in this side.
Yeah, that's a super common pattern that we see, where you have a business where the traditional business is shrinking. For sure, media has been very hard hit by that. And the one part of the business that's still growing is the digital side of the business and the online side of the business. And so any CEO looking at that, says, hey, I need to invest in this in a big way as the future of the company.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey that I think so many media companies are on, and there's different levels of maturity, and you can often understand from the outside when you talk to them about where they are on that scale of maturity. So the first level is, do you even have product managers? If you have product managers, is their remit and their job role really understood by the organization? Are they embedded within the business functions? Are they using data and insights to drive their work based on hypotheses? Or are they just taking tasks from the business or from the journalists or the content creators? And so you can very quickly, through a bunch of 5 or 10 questions, figure out where on the journey that media company is.
Yeah, gotcha. Actually, a quick question for the audience. Do we have any folks from a product management role or in a product role here? Okay,
that's great.
A handful of folks. So just a question for you, Deep. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to become a chief product officer? You've obviously worked at tons of different media companies, Economist, Financial Times, now at ITV. For the folks in this room who have a similar aspiration to become a chief product officer, can you tell them a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, sure. Just to clarify, CNBC, then Economist, then ITV.
Economist, then ITV.
But I think a lot of people come into product through very non-traditional ways. I have a particularly non-traditional way into product, which is I was a journalist for the first 10 years of my life. I saw a need within media companies on the news side that there needed to be a connective tissue between the content creators or the journalists, the technology side, and the business side. And that's really how I got into product myself. So I spent 10 years there. But even before I had the lexicon or the words about product management, I was working at Bloomberg. And I was, as a journalist, shopping around these two-page memos of creating a B2C product, which would be called Bloomberg TV Plus, would be a mix of data and linear television. And I remember at some point, Bloomberg's this amazing company with these kind of glass conference rooms. I could see a whole bunch of consultants there. It was Booz Allen and all kinds of consulting firms doing this work. And I said, I need to figure out what those guys are doing, because I'm a journalist shopping around ideas, and I don't know how to put together a proper business plan. So I went off to business school, graduated in the worst economic recession. It was 2008, 2009. So there were literally no jobs. Everyone was wondering what a journalist was doing in business school and what I wanted to do next. And I didn't know that product management was really a function, and was really nascent at that time. But I ended up back in a news company with CNBC and very quickly got into the digital side and started to work on a number of things, including a new international edition of our website, an international Android app, and discovered product. And since then, I've absolutely loved it. So I think the fact that I was able to do that from a non-traditional background should hopefully give a lot of people hope that product management, since you sit between all these different functions, can be this really interesting job where no day is the same, and you're really trying to figure out strategic questions for the business, but also execute on them.
What sort of things was CNBC looking for at that time that convinced them that product was worthwhile to invest in?
Yeah, I think it's the digital side was growing extremely fast. Our digital audiences were growing fast. We needed to get more revenue from the digital side. We had a really successful television, broadcast, linear, cable side of the business that was doing really well from an ad sales perspective. And all the investments were going into digital. And the traditional model, which would be a project manager working with IT, really for a lot of companies didn't work. It was waterfall, project managers telling IT what to build. The customer wasn't front and center in a lot of those conversations. And so very quickly, companies like CNBC realized that you really needed a product and a UX function to understand what the customer wanted, do the user research and discovery up front, come up with what the features and functionality of our mobile app or our website would be, and then to get those built through technology, working very closely cross-functionally with technology. So I think that was their big realization.
And then how did you go from that first role at CNBC to a chief product officer?
So I think at CNBC, my journey was really organic. At first, I started within the product team, became VP of product, and was leading the product and design team. And then something really interesting happened. Our CTO left for another job at Comcast, and my boss asked me to help him. And I said, I'm not a CTO. Go find your CTO. Never done technology. I've come as a journalist. And after about 6 months of running, as you know, many people who work in product, you all probably face this. You work in these agile squads, very cross-functional squads. And sometimes it's complicated when you report into a CPO and the CTO, and there's all these different, different domains. And your teams actually are really embedded and trying to work on the same metric or the same goal. And so my boss then said, you're doing this job, how about you do this permanently? So that was a really interesting moment for me. I became a CPTO and did both product, technology, and delivery in one role. Funny story, like a week after I took that role as a CPTO, we had an unbelievable move in the Dow. It was a 1,000-point flash crash, and the Dow fell 1,000 points. And I suddenly saw my phone buzzing. I pulled out my phone. It was the CEO calling me. So the CEO never calls me. And he said, what's happening? Our website's not loading. So it was a really interesting moment where I'd just been in product, and we now had a situation where our website wasn't working. And we very quickly figured out that there had been a lack of understanding of what it took to compete in digital, and we hadn't yet scaled our infrastructure to deal with huge amounts of traffic. Digital was a nascent area for us. It's kind of the old days of Twitter. And when you realize the spikes that you can get in digital traffic, it very quickly changed our tech strategy. We moved everything to the cloud, everything up in AWS, and we could really scale from then on for the big moments. But that took a huge digital transformation for our infrastructure, our teams, and we really changed the way we did a lot of things.
It sounds like the team, didn't really realize how big the online part of the business was going to become, and so they were caught a little bit by surprise that there was so much demand for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So we've talked a bunch about kind of the technology side of how the businesses are changing when it comes to digital transformation. Let's talk a little bit about the organizational dynamics. We were talking earlier this morning about just how to bring an organization through thinking about their role in a different way. Can you tell us a little bit about, as a product leader in the here and now, what are those, what are the difficulties on the organizational transformation? What do you have to convince people to do? What are the challenges with that?
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing, you start with the strategy and the business model change. It all starts there. You need strategic alignment. So what are you trying to do? At ITV, for example, we've recognized the importance of streaming. We have, for a number of years, made a number of investments. There's been ITV Hub, which is our main service, but we also have BritBox, which is a subscription VOD service. And what we've done, and what we're in the process of doing, is putting all of that together into one single streaming service, so ITVX, which will have all our content. It'll have largely be ad-supported, but then have a subscription tier. So it starts with the strategy.
So this is the big, ITV's big bet as a
ITV's
business.
Yeah, that's right. So it starts with, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be in this space? What gets you to win? So that's where it all starts. It always starts with the strategy and the business model transformation. We're going to have two business models, and largely an ad-supported one, but also subscription, and give customers the choice. But then from then on, start all the org changes to support that. So you need to then bring together cross-functional teams to make that happen. In the case of ITV, for example, it's right from the supply chain, how a broadcast asset that's made for linear television with metadata has to now work all the way through on the streaming side. It involves bringing marketing along on the journey, involves bringing data along the journey, the product and technology side. So you need to bring all these teams together in this really cross-functional way. So what often happens is, once you have the strategic clarity and the product vision for what you're trying to do, it's the change in the culture and the behaviors, breaking down the silos, and then bringing in the voice of the customer. So before we did this, we did a lot of user research to try to understand what users wanted, what would really work from the ITV perspective. And you bring in all that voice of the customer and the voice of the user in. As long as sometimes, if you have an existing product in market, what are users doing on the product in terms of the data? So what's the quant side telling you? And then what's the qualitative feedback from customers? So what are you hearing in your App Store reviews? What are you hearing in different channels? What are you hearing in user testing? You bring all of that together to then come up with a roadmap, which is the execution of that strategy, and how you will actually address some of those customer pain points.
Were there any interesting learnings from that part on voice of the customer in terms of what it is that you guys needed to adjust about your strategy and your approach?
The really interesting thing for a lot of companies is that the voice of the customer has been there for a while. Most companies have a channel for accessing that voice of the customer, but it's because their lack of strategic alignment and the lack of the resourcing to deal with that is often the challenge in most companies. So once you have the clear North Star vision of what you're trying to build, you get the teams aligned, the voice of the customer has always been there in some shape or form. So for us, it wasn't a revelation.
Yeah.
It was just about how do you bring that together and then execute on that.
So there's been a lot of talk around streaming fatigue, and that there's a lot of services now that are moving to this model online. How do you think about your guys' plans for how you differentiate and stand out in the crowded marketplace?
Yeah, so I think the thing about the streaming world is it's really been dominated by the subscription players. So obviously Netflix and Disney, and now increasingly HBO Max and all of those. But I think there's increasingly a recognition that really the ad-supported business model is a really interesting one to pursue in the streaming world. We've done that quite successfully for a number of years. Obviously, we're now doubling down on that and making a much bigger bet with ITVX. So the service that we will launch later this year will be largely ad-supported, because I think you look at the statistics for the UK market, almost 69% of households now are subscribing to at least one subscription service, so one subscription VOD service. And actually, the average number of subscription services per household are more than 2, so just over 2. So you have this...
people are willing to do multiple.
People are willing to do multiple. So they have this behavior subscription stacking, which you've had in the US as well for quite a while. So we really think that a mixed model is the right one for us and for the UK market. So we will have a largely ad-supported one. So if you already have another subscription service, you can come to ITVX, or today we have ITV Hub, and watch with ads, so watch for free but with ads. And then for some percentage of that audience who really want an ad-free experience, who want to unlock more content, you will upgrade to the subscription tier. And that kind of mixed model of both AVOD and SVOD gives customers choice, and it also helps on the content creator or the streamer side to manage two different business models and trade up people when it's right for them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So one of the things, my favorite question always to ask is, what have been some insights that have come from the data that have impacted the product strategy? So I'd love to hear either from your time at CNBC or The Economist or currently, what are some interesting insights around user behavior that were maybe unexpected that ended up having an impact on how you approached your product strategy?
Yeah. So I think the media business is an attention business. So really the key metric that you're trying to optimize for is engagement. And different media companies are coming at this in different ways. When we were at CNBC, it was really around loyalty. So it was a lot about, because we had a business financial news product, it was how often people came back. So it was really about visits per unique visitor. So frequency and recency were really important to us. The interesting thing was when I was at The Economist was we did a lot of work. We looked at a lot of different models. The FT has done a bit of work around recency, frequency, and value. So really, adding recency, frequency, as well as the value of the content. And we did our own kind of regression analysis, and we found that actually, for The Economist particularly, it wasn't so much about recency and frequency, it was about depth of visitation. Now, The Economist is a long-form analytical product, and it's not about hard-breaking news, it's really about the analysis of it. So I think often, largely you're trying to optimize for attention, but you really have to look at your data and your customer behavior to find what's the right metric for you within engagement. At ITV, it's really about hours watched. So we look at, obviously, the number of customers we have, whether that's SVOD customers or subscribers, but increasingly, it's really about hours watched. Because with hours watched, it's either a sign of engagement if you're a subscriber, or it's our opportunity to have available ad impressions for that user, because you watch a lot of hours of television. So that's what we're trying to optimize for. And similarly, we're also doing some engagement and data science work now to go even deeper from that. So I think, but the really interesting insight sometimes comes from that data science work. So at The Economist, for example, we did that data science work, and what we really found was our app users were extremely highly engaged compared to our web users. Very similar to what we saw at CNBC. Your app users are often your most loyal, highly engaged. The web users are often people coming from search or social. They're one and done. They're trying to sample your product. And so you really need different strategies for each of those. You really try to optimize for long-term engagement in your app. And with the web, you're really trying to convert to e-commerce or convert to registration or get some data on them. And then in the case of The Economist, the other really interesting finding was we had a mix of audio and text content. We found actually audio content was 3x the value of an article read. So we then really started to optimize, putting more and more audio front and center for the users in the mobile app, getting people to listen to more podcasts, audio-narrated articles. And what we found is for the busy user on the go with their smartphone, audio was a great way for them to consume the kind of intelligence and the analysis of the Economist. So I think that kind of like deeper level data science work where you do the regression, you understand what the drivers for customer behavior are, can then really unleash the power of the product team, because then you can optimize off of that. Another really interesting thing we saw was there was a critical week 8 and 9 when we had a trial period for subscriber, 12-week trial period. It was really critical in week 8 and 9 that they consume something. So that's another thing we could, as a product team, then optimize for to get people to read.
Part of the user journey is really important.
Part of the user journey. So you can even look at it over a time-based thing and see what are the key conversion points that you really need to nail as a product team, and then figure out how to activate people in those moments of that user journey.
That's really interesting what you said around the audio content at The Economist being really compelling. And that wasn't something you guys had known before, that it was 3 times more valuable than the text-based stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the audio content grew organically from the newsroom as a really interesting way of bringing the economist's intelligence and analysis to customers. But I think without the data science work, it was hard to understand, well, what's the value of that to something else?
Versus something else.
And I think like just trying to understand the relationship between the different activities that even the content creators are doing and where to push forward, where to really push people towards and nudge them into can really help.
One of that actually reminds me, like there's so many things that pop out from a data perspective when you're looking at it that you might not expect. I remember I was actually talking with a customer from a totally different industry a few weeks ago, Burger King. And one of the really interesting things about Burger King was that they found that they had actually a very engaged segment of users who were very into their vegan options.
Oh, wow.
And so you might not expect Burger King to have a big customer base of vegan customers, but that was actually really important to the to a section of their customer base. And so that really helped them realize that, like, hey, we need to make special offers for these people. We need to target them and figure out who they are, and that's an important part of our customer base as well.
I think segmented behaviors are so interesting, and finding those segments, those nuggets in the data. I'm almost curious for you, because you sell an analytic product in a B2B sense, but it must be really interesting looking at how your customers are using product. Do you guys have a metric or North Star metric?
Yeah, so we actually did a study a few years back where we really wanted to understand what was the best predictor of long-term usage of Amplitude. And we looked at tons and tons of different things. We looked at whether someone created a chart. We looked at, hey, maybe we just want as many people as possible to view a chart. We looked at, hey, maybe they have to customize a chart. The behavior that was actually most compelling was when they shared a chart. So sharing a chart within an organization was the #1 activity that someone could do that would keep them long-term engaged as an Amplitude user. And so now looking at that kind of in retrospect, it's like, well, obviously, getting buy-in with an organization that, someone creates content, someone shares it, and all of that is really important. Sounds really obvious, but it very much wasn't, at the time. We were just, before we had actually this metric where we were just looking at monthly active users. That was kind of the core metric, very standard for, it's the most basic metric that you can look at as any digital company. And we realized that seeing that, deeper level of engagement, and particularly that kind of peer-to-peer engagement with an organization, that was the key thing that made Amplitude really compelling. And then we also looked at kind of the frequency of use, to kind of your comment before, where one of the realizations was that getting someone, we looked at daily, we looked at weekly, we looked at monthly. It turns out weekly was the right cadence for usage of Amplitude as a product. And then the last thing we said was, how many sharing users do you actually have to get onto the platform every week? And it turns out like 5 was kind of the magic threshold. So if you'd at least get 5 users who would share content every week, that you were much, much more likely to engage and retain long-term in the product than anyone else. So, I think it's this question of getting a North Star metric for your product team is one that's incredibly important. And to your point, it's very, very customized based on the business and the situation and the type of users that your user base is.
Yeah. Did you actually come up with that North Star metric then, based on?
Yeah. So now that we've set that as the North Star metric, the product team has goals around hitting that. We track that every single day at Amplitude. We now try to figure out all the things we can do from a customer support side to get users to that threshold of 5 users sharing content every week. It's a really huge part of how we operate the business. So
that's great, fascinating.
Yeah, so it's definitely really exciting. So unfortunately, I think we're out of time. Definitely could go on for a while longer, but Deep, thank you very much for sharing your insights as Chief Product Officer, as ITV, and where the product world is going.
Yep, thank you so much, Spencer. Great being here with you.